ancient tomb really does hold Alexander the Great's father, controversial study claims. You notice that Alexander the Great, most of his portrait statues have him sort of has his neck at a certain angle, very strange angle. That's because he did have a deformity on his neck, and he only allowed one specific sculptor to make statues of him so that he didn't look too weird. Okay, but he did have a deformity on his neck that I don't know if it was from an accident or a war, a battle injury, but or if he was born with this. But that's why we usually see his neck that is not straight, but somehow uneven. Now, ancient tomb belonging to his father. Researchers used X-ray analysis to determine the occupants inside a trio of royal tombs in Greece. The archaeologists may have finally identified the names of Alexander the Great's father, half-brother, and son in a trio of tombs at the necropolis in Greece. Researchers have long debated which members of the Macedonian royal family were buried in each tomb. Now, Macedonia, of course, is the northern part of Greece. Now, the controversial new review suggests that researchers previously got the tombs mixed up and claim they have identified the actual occupants of each tomb. Known as the Great Tumulus, the burial site in Ege, in the original Macedonian capital, modern-day Vergina, a town in northern Greece, contains 3 tombs that were built during the 4th century, according to a review published in December 2023 issue of the Journal of Archaeological Sciences reports. Researchers initially discovered the tomb complex in the 1970s and proposed that the crypts, known as tombs 1, 2, and 3, contained the remains of several royals who were closely related to Alexander the Great, the Macedonian leader, the leader of Greece. He united Greece, actually, who reigned from 336 BC until his death in 323 BC. And those individuals included Alexander the Great's father, King Philip II, his son Alexander IV, whom he had with his wife Roxana, who was the princess of the Persian king, and his older half-brother, King Philip III Archidaeus. However, there's been ongoing debate about which royal is interred in each tomb. To determine the identities of the skeletons, the archaeologists behind the new review looked at ancient writings about each individual, including any injuries or skeletal anomalies that could help identify them, and compared these to X-rays of each skeleton. It was like a fascinating detective ancient story, revealed lead author Antonios Bartsiokas, professor emeritus of anthropology and paleoanthropology at the Democracy University of Thrace in Greece. Bartsiokas and colleagues identified King Philip II as the occupant of Tomb 1 based on the male skeleton's fused knee joint. The injury was consistent with his historic evidence of the lameness of King Philip II. According to the review, he was buried alongside one of his wives, Queen Cleopatra, and their newborn child, the researchers suggested. And this was the only newborn in the Macedonian dynasty to have died shortly after it was born, Bartsiokas said. The age of the female skeleton is 18 years old, was determined based on the epiphyseal lines, which show when the bone stopped growing of her humerus. And this number coincides with the age of Cleopatra from the ancient sources. Cleopatra, as we know, is a very ancient Greek name. Now, however, experts have long argued that King Philip II was actually buried in Tomb 2 and not in Tomb 1, as the review concluded. And because no physical trauma was found on the male skeleton in Tomb 2, the new review concluded that he was King Philip III Archidaeus, who ruled Macedonia following Alexander the Great's death. He was buried with his wife Adea Eurycide, a warrior woman who was leader of an army, Bartsiokas said. Her skeleton was surrounded by several pieces of weaponry, including, according to the review, his skeleton, evidence, and the pattern of his cremated bones have been shown to be consistent with the circumstances of the death of King Archidaeus and his wife, Bartioka said. Tomb 1 was a very small and poor tomb, and Tomb 2 was very big and rich. This ties with the historical evidence that Macedonia was in a state of bankruptcy when Alexander started his campaign, and yet very rich when he died. This is consistent with Tomb 1 belonging to Philip II and Tomb 2 belonging to his son Archidaeus. Moreover, the skeleton in Tomb 2 did not have a telltale sign that has been associated with Philip II, an eye injury. Previous studies determined that the male skull in Tomb 2 showed a traumatic injury on the right side of the skull, but whose claims have been refuted in several studies, including in this new review. Philip II is known from ancient sources to have suffered an eye injury that blinded him, Bartioka said. I was surprised to find the absence of such an eye injury in the male skeleton of Tomb 2, which was initially widely described as a real injury that identified Philip II. In other words, this was a case of a description of a morphological feature that did not exist. This detail also helped the researchers determine that Tomb 2 did not house Philip II's remains. Of note, the skeleton from Tomb 1 did not have an eye injury either, the researchers of the new review found. And lastly, researchers identified the occupant of Tomb 3 as Alexander IV, Alexander the Great's teenage son, who was killed in a power struggle following his father's death, a conclusion that most scholars agree upon, the authors wrote in their review. Ian Worthington, a professor of ancient history at Macquarie University in Sydney, who was not involved in the review, said that the fascinating new review contained rich analysis of forensic examinations and some historical context and mention of opposing views, but that he still thinks Philip II was buried in Tomb 2. Among other things, crucially, is that the two chambers of Tomb 2 were built at different times, whereas the burial of Philip III in Eurycide was a planned double one, meaning the construction of both tombs should be contemporaneous, Worthington said. Worthington also concluded that there is evidence of eye trauma in the skull fragments. There is also the significant issue of the trauma around the right eye of the skull from Tomb 2, which is consistent with the wound that Philip suffered at Methone in 354 BC, when a bolt from the rampart struck him in the eye. Worthington said, even the undecorated walls of the tomb, in contrast to Tomb 1, lean towards Philip II being the occupant, as we know that his son and successor, Alexander III, had to bury his father quickly to deal with the revolt of the Greeks and conduct a purge against opponents. Alexander planned to revisit the tomb and make it one to rival the pyramids, but he never did that. He never got to do that. Worthington added that while we will likely not know for sure who the occupants are, Philip II is the most likely candidate. Ultimately, no identification of the deceased in Tomb 2 can ever be 100% compelling in light of the present evidence, analysis, and reasoned historical argument, but on balance, the tomb is most likely that of Macedonia's greatest king, Philip II, that is, Alexander the Great's father. I would not say that he was the greatest king of northern Greece, Macedonia. Alexander the Great has that title. And this is on Life Science by Jennifer Nawiliki. Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.